The winter wind howled across the Montana plains, carrying with it the promise of another brutal night. Sarah Mitchell pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stood at the crossroads, her worn boots barely keeping the cold from seeping through to her feet. The small town behind her had nothing left to offer, no work, no hope, and certainly no charity for a woman with no family and no prospects. Ahead. Through the swirling snow, she could make out the warm glow of windows from the Hartwell ranch. She had heard whispers about the place in town. The owner, they said, was a man scarred by war and loneliness, who rarely came to town and never took visitors. But they also said he was fair, and that his ranch hands never went hungry, a stomach cramped with familiar hunger. She hadn't eaten a proper meal in 3 days. Her fingers, stiff with cold, clutched the small bundle that contained everything. She owned in this world a change of clothes, her mother's wedding ring, and a letter of recommendation from her last employer. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. The walk to the ranch house felt endless. Each step through the deepening snow required effort she wasn't sure she had left. The wind seemed determined to push her back toward town, but Sarah pressed forward. She had made her decision. There was nowhere else to go. When she finally reached the porch, her legs were shaking from cold and exhaustion. The house was larger than she had expected, built from sturdy logs with wide windows that glowed like beacons in the storm. She could see movement inside, shadows passing back and forth in the warm light. Sarah raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. Once she crossed this threshold, there would be no going back. She would be offering herself in exchange for shelter, food, and safety. It wasn't the future she had dreamed of as a young girl, but dreams were luxuries she could no longer afford. The door opened before her knuckles could touch the wood. The man who stood before her was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. A scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, stark white against his weathered skin. This had to be James Hartwell, the scarred rancher the townspeople spoke of in hushed tones. You're freezing, he said simply, stepping aside to let her in. His voice was deeper than she had expected and kinder. Sarah stumbled into the warmth of the house, her teeth chattering so hard she couldn't speak. The interior was simple but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace crackling with life and furniture that looked well used but cared for. Sit by the fire, James instructed, guiding her to a chair near the hearth. I'll get you something hot to drink. He disappeared into what she assumed was the kitchen, leaving Sarah alone to absorb the reality of where she was. The warmth began to seep into her bones, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. James returned with a steaming mug of coffee and a thick wool blanket. He draped the blanket around her shoulders without a word, then sat in the chair across from her. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt patient, like he was giving her time to gather herself. I don't have money, Sarah finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I can work, I can cook, clean, mend clothes. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I won't be any trouble. James studied her face in the firelight. What's your name? Sarah Mitchell. Where's your family, Sarah? Gone. The word came out harder than she intended. Both parents died of fever last spring. I've been trying to make my own way since then, but... She gestured helplessly at her worn clothes and thin frame. James nodded slowly. The storm's supposed to last 3 days. You can stay until it passes, no conditions attached. After that, we'll talk about work if you're still interested. Sarah blinked back tears of relief. She had prepared herself to negotiate terms, to explain what she could offer in exchange for shelter. She hadn't expected simple kindness. Why? She asked. James was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. I know what it's like to have nowhere to go, he said finally. And this house has been too quiet for too long. Over the next 3 days as the storm raged outside, Sarah discovered that James Hartwell was not the bitter, isolated man the townspeople believed him to be. He was reserved, certainly, and there was a sadness about him that seemed as permanent as his scar. But he was also gentle and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that emerged when he felt comfortable. Sarah learned that he had inherited the ranch from his uncle 5 years ago after returning from the war. The scar on his face was a souvenir from a battle he rarely spoke about. But it was clear that the wounds that mattered most were the ones no one could see. In return, Sarah found herself sharing stories of her childhood, her parents, and her dreams of teaching school someday. It had been so long since anyone had listened to her, really listened, that the words tumbled out like water from a broken dam. When the storm finally broke. Sarah was helping James prepare breakfast when he made his offer. I need a housekeeper, he said, not looking up from the eggs he was scrambling. The job pays fair wages, room and board included. There's a small cabin behind the main house that needs some fixing up, but it would be yours. Sarah set down the plate she was holding. You don't have to... I'm not offering out of pity, James interrupted, finally meeting her eyes. This place runs better with someone who cares about it. And you do care. I can see it in how you've straightened the curtains and organized the pantry without being asked. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. I came here thinking I would have to trade my freedom for survival, and instead... She looked around the warm kitchen, then back at James, who was watching her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, hope. Carefully guarded but unmistakably there. Instead I think I might have found home. James smiled then, the first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed his entire face, making the scar seem less like a mark of pain and more like a sign of survival. The cabin needs a new roof, he said. But spring's coming and we have time to make it perfect. Sarah nodded, understanding that he wasn't just talking about the cabin. They both had repairs to make, wounds to heal, and dreams to rebuild. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, those seemed like possibilities rather than impossibilities. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and pink. It looked like the beginning of something beautiful.